Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace. Game number 30, Top Gear GT Championship. Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines, because we have another racing game. Kind of interesting that my third batch of games started and ended with a racing game, huh? But yeah, let's take a look at Top Gear GT Championship, released in North America in July of 2001, a very early GBA title. In fact, while this wasn't a launch title in America, it was in both Europe and Japan, so it definitely has that GBA pioneer aura going for it. Anyway, this game was developed and published by Kemco and is part of the Top Gear video game series, which initially started back in 1992 on the Super Nintendo, and not to be confused with the BBC TV series of the same name. Now, I have personally never played any games of this series, or at least I don't think I have anyway. It's honestly kind of hard to tell, because it definitely could be a case where maybe I had played another game before without realizing or making that connection. It does kind of have that generic video game racer vibe to it after all. Hey, future SlimKirby here. Funnily enough, I unintentionally proved my own point here, as I completely forgot that I played Top Gear 3000 for one of the Super 16 events back in 2023. So, yeah, I had actually played a Top Gear game before, just kind of forgot about this one. How about that? Anyway, what exactly will we be doing here to complete this game? Well, when we start the game, we honestly don't really have very many choices, just Quick Race, Championship, and Option. And since Quick Race is basically the, hey, let's just throw you into the middle of gameplay mode, it looks like beating Championship is going to be the ultimate goal for this challenge here, which I'll get into what that entails a bit later. I did check out the options menu first though, and hey, for all of you who aren't derpy Americans like myself, you can actually choose between miles per hour and kilometers per hour. Seriously, I never understood why we don't use the metric system like everyone else in the world, especially when the metric system is just so much more convenient with the powers of 10 when going to different units, but I digress. So it's off the championship mode we go. I name myself Slimbo, as is customary for this challenge, and then I have to make a decision on what vehicle I'll be using for this game. It was a really hard decision, but I ultimately landed on the Cusco Subaru Impreza. Why? Well, because it really impressed me with its stats. Wait, didn't I make that joke already in Need for Speed Underground? Whoops, my bad folks. You can also choose whether or not to use manual or auto transmission, and, well, I hate gear shifting, so auto it is. Alright, time for round 1 to begin as we head to Twin Ring Motegi. We get a few options on the menu here, from being able to do a free run on the track, doing a qualify lap for initial race placement, flat out just starting the race as it is, and doing some setup on your car. I checked up on the setup menu to start, but since I have no idea what any of this stuff did, or at least I didn't at the time, I pretty much left it alone for now, and would adjust later if I needed to. And trust me, later on, I did end up needing to do so. Before I did anything, I did a free run just in the interest of getting used to the gameplay. After all, if they were going to offer it, why not, right? The controls were honestly fine. You do have to be a little careful when turning though, but I wouldn't say it's too bad if you manage to slow down enough when making each turn. And unlike Need for Speed Underground, hey, look, the game actually has a damn on-screen map. How freaking convenient. But yeah, using this, it's fairly easy to tell when a turn is coming and how sharp it'll be as well. Since we're in the middle of gameplay though, I should probably also address the general game presentation. Honestly, for a launch title, I do think the game looks pretty good. However, I could see some people maybe having some issues with the general movement speed of your car in the foreground when in contrast with the background, which doesn't seem to move much at all. Thankfully, it's not too hard to get used to after playing it for a while, but I do know that not everyone's eyes work in the same manner, so individual eyeball discretion is advised. And for music, well, since you're likely listening to some Mario Kart music right now, yeah, this game doesn't really have much of a soundtrack. Some of the menus have tunes, but during the actual racing, all you hear is the motor of your car, so yeah, brace yourself for that one. After doing a lap of practice, I decided to jump into the qualifier, and as qualifiers generally work, you and your opponents basically do one lap around the track, and based on the finishing times of every racer, you get placed based on your time, with the fastest times being up in front and the slower ones in the back. So, doing well here is probably a smart idea, as it means less cars you'll have to pass in the beginning of the race. I wouldn't say my qualifier here was amazing or anything, but apparently it was much better than everyone else's, as I got placed in the pole position for the first race. How exciting. And while I'm not going to sugarcoat anything here, I pretty much destroyed this first race. Even with a couple of stumbles on the last lap, I still ended up beating second place by a whole 30 seconds. So yeah, I got this circuit and this game started on a pretty good note, I must say. Round 2 takes place at Fuji Speedway, but before we begin this race, there are two things worth mentioning that will mix things up for every race in the circuit. For one, there are weather conditions that will change in between races. However, those conditions are simply, it's sunny and it's raining, and that's really about it. And as you might expect, when it rains, the track is a little more slippery, not overly so, but you'll probably notice a slight difference at least. You can obviously adjust some of your vehicle settings to compensate for this, but I never really felt like I had to, for what it's worth. The second thing worth noting is actually something I didn't even notice until a couple of races in. But depending on your placement in the previous race, you will be given a handicap modifier of extra weight in your car. So the better you do in the circuit, the more weight you'll have to deal with, which means your car will in general be slower to accelerate. I absolutely hated this feature. I get why it's a thing and why they may use it in actual professional racing events to, balance it so one person doesn't get so much of an imbalanced lead overall. But still, to me that just seems like if people can't cope with my skill, well, that's kind of a skill issue on them and I shouldn't really be punished for it. I'm not generally that kind of skill issue person unless it's in a joking manner, but in a challenge like this where I'm trying to beat every single GBA game, let's just say I may make some exceptions. Getting to the actual race though, yeah, it was still very easy, and I didn't even do a qualifying lap this time. In fact, this race was probably easier than the first one just because there was a super long straightaway that took literally 35 seconds to get through. Trust me, I timed it. I hadn't noticed anything with my car's acceleration though, but to be fair, not like there was much to notice in this track anyway, nor a lot of big turns, so I wasn't really slowing down much. Round 3 takes place at Strongland Sugo, and once again, another instance of domination. I will say though, this track was probably a bit more difficult than the other two, and a few rough turns did cause the gap in between me and second place to be a bit narrower, but still, I was still cruising as far as I was concerned. Round 4 took place at Thai Circuit Ida, and this was definitely where I met the most resistance of my opponents so far. Did I still win though? Well, yeah, but I have to give this level something, right? And also set up the next level, of course, because for round 5, we had the Central Park Mine Circuit. And no, before anyone asks, there were no landmines here, because that would actually be interesting. This course just had another very long straightaway, and that was pretty much it. Although, believe it or not, after having a pretty strong streak of victories, I actually got last place on this one. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I was convinced it was the weight handicap, because I did start to notice my off-road mistakes were becoming more costly, and the computer opponents seemed to be breaking away more. And at the end of the race, when looking at the standings, I noticed that I had 80 kilograms of baggage, with only 2 other opponents having any sort of penalty at all, and unfortunately they got the top 2, so yeah. In addition to dealing with the weight impacting my control, the AI I was contending with was still rubber banding enough to capitalize on my blunder, and that aspect made me a little nervous about this game moving forward. I mean, it was great that I had managed 4 straight firsts in a row, enough that even a last place would still have me with a nice lead buffer, but I didn't want to have to intentionally tank my own progress in one race just to make my time better in another one, especially since I really wanted to keep that buffer of first place points I had received so far, since I had no idea how long this game was going to be anyway. I decided to do a little test with the game's save system, not saving after round 5 and going back to it if I needed to, so it was off to round 6 at Suzuka Circuits. This race went a lot better than the last one. In fact, it kinda had a similar result like the first 4, where once I pulled ahead, it was pretty much GG. It really seemed like Central Park is just an outlier race or something, because seriously, even the CPU AI didn't really break apart much either, and when the race finished, it did seem like those that had weight limits tended to struggle more than the ones who didn't, as should have been the case for the previous race. My last place did decrease my weight limit though, as it went down by 10 kilograms, so at least I knew the system it was trying to throw at me. But perhaps the most shocking part of this race's conclusion was that, well, that was the last race of the circuit, and we won. We were given a nice congratulations screen to show that we were the champion of the season, and a message that showed pretty much what I expected. Challenge next class, which means, yeah, we're not quite done yet. The championship pretty much continues on to year 2, where we pretty much start over the whole series from scratch with 0 points, and we also get a new selection of cars as well. I obviously have no idea of what any of this means, seeing how I don't follow racing to any sort of degree, but for the first wave we used GT300MR cars, but now we're moving on to GT500FR cars, which I assume means these cars are made with better stats, weights, and speed caps in mind. Quite literally a new class of car for a new racing class, I guess you could say. I was a little unsettled just because this meant I had to get used to the feel of a new car, but hey, at least the game had a save system I could play around with if I felt like I needed to go back and select something else. I ended up picking Castrol Tom's Supra, which seemed like it had the best stats, but how should I know, honestly. I also noticed very quickly that the races we were going through for this year were pretty much the same ones as the previous year. So yeah, basically the same 6 tracks all over again. Hey, at least there would be some familiarity there, I guess, and it also made me realize that this could end up being a pretty short game, all things considered. Getting used to the new car, though, was definitely something I needed to get a handle on. I could tell the AI was going to be more of a problem, and this showed pretty early, even during the first round, where I didn't get the lead until the final lap, and even then, I messed up at the very end, forcing me to get a second place instead of a first. Not a great start, admittedly, but a part of me wanted to test this because this meant I wouldn't be getting as strong as a weight penalty early on as well, so I kept things going. The next 2 races went fine though, as I did end up picking up a first place from both of them, which did help push me to the front of the pack in the circuit. The weight penalties were more extreme on this class though, adding 50 kilograms for each victory, a far cry from the 20 kilogram increase in the first class, so I did have to be careful here. Thankfully, with multiple save files, I could afford to get kinda creative with my retries. Also, another factor of this class compared to the last one, races on average were about 30 seconds faster than the first class, so it didn't take as long to retry. On the flip side though, the faster speeds did make the tracks with tight turns a bit more difficult. Round 4 was actually the perfect evidence of that too, as this race unfortunately led to a 5th place for me, which wasn't ideal considering we hadn't even done Central Park yet, and that was the race that really got me the first time around. And sure enough, that race was next, so going into my Achilles heel, while also being down a few points from first place, not a great situation. And sure enough, the results were painting that picture too, because once again, I just could not keep up with them on this track. I even modified my stats a little too, and while it did seem to help a little, I was still trailing by a significant margin. I mean, look at the minimap here. This is after just one lap, and the spread is just all over the place. This race was truly an outlier in a huge way, and I needed some kind of strategy to compensate for it. I ultimately decided to go back to round 4 and try again with an earlier save I had. I managed to get third this time, which was much better, and actually had me leading still after the current results were posted. So even if I bombed Central Park again, I still had a shot to win the series at least. And sure enough, I didn't even bother with Central Park. I just retired during the race, took the automatic last place, saw I was still somehow in the lead for the circuit, and then went on to Suzuka, which, yeah, this was way easier than Central Park. I don't know if it's just a better track or the CPUs just have more trouble with it, but even after a few screw-ups and slowdowns, I still managed to win definitively here, which solidified my lead and made me the overall victor for Year 2. Maybe not the cleanest win overall, but here at GB Ace, we take what we can get, believe me. And with that, Year 3 began. Now, a couple of things started crossing my mind here at this point. The most obvious being, okay, how heckin' long is this game and how many times will I have to do this loop? I checked a long play video on YouTube, but even that seemed to end prematurely without giving any sort of information if the credits would even roll at any point after a season that would signify the end of the mode. My buddy Odinspec checked a Let's Play though, and he confirmed to me that 4 years was the magic number, so I was essentially halfway done at this point. That gave me hope that I wouldn't have to continue this for too long, but admittedly I was a bit worried about the difficulty, as even Year 2 gave me some trouble in certain places. What's interesting though is that when I looked at the vehicles for this season, I really wasn't noticing much of a difference between what I had already available for Year 2. Although, when I looked at the footage now, all the cars were certainly different, with the one exception being the Supra I'd been using. For some reason, that was the only car that was consistent about the two vehicle lists. I'm not sure if we just apparently retired all those other brands or something. Again, the game wasn't entirely clear on that. But hey, we had some racing to do still, so let's keep it going. And it's probably not too relevant in the grand scheme of things anyway. To start this season off, I admittedly did try one of the other Supra brands, the ESSO Ultron Tiger Supra. And you know, I didn't do that well. Really the only difference in stats was 50 extra kilogram weight on the Tiger Supra, but even that shouldn't have had too much of a difference. Maybe the AI was getting harder and I just didn't connect that together, but who can say for sure. I did throw away this attempt though, and started the year again with my previous Supra, and things felt a whole lot better. Guess I'll be sticking with this one for the rest of the way, but even still, my first race ended up with a 5th place. Still not a very encouraging start to the season. However, I continued on despite this start, and ended up using this awkward beginning to figure out some counterplays for the rest of the year. For one, I tried a car stat distribution that could help with some of the struggles I was having with the races, mainly just getting messed up on awkward turns. And 2, I actually started doing the qualifiers again, because not only was the prospect of starting in front of anybody more reassuring, since I didn't have to work myself through the ranks to get ahead, but sometimes the opponents pushing me from behind could be helpful in giving me a boost forward if I was recovering from a weird turn. And sure enough, this mentality was giving me wide gap leads again. I won the next 3 races effortlessly, still struggled with race 5, but I at least got 4th this time, and my biggest point rival got last, which put me in a good position for the final race, and then won that race too to take me to victory for the 3rd year in a row. I guess I just needed to find some ways to get my confidence back. Maybe that was the overall challenge for this game. But yeah, back to the start for Year 4. New cars are once again available, but so was the Supra I had been using, so why change anything? I picked it again, used the same stat distribution as before, and went once more through the same 6 tracks again, doing the qualifiers if I was uncertain of my performance. In other words, since I hadn't won the first race in a while, I did the qualifier there, but decided against it for races 2 and 3 since I had regularly won that one in every season regardless, and didn't think I needed any extra boost there. And sure enough, victory in all three for a good start to the season. I decided to do the qualifier for race number 4 though, since that's been a little inconsistent for me, and hey, doing the qualifier actually got me a 4th win. And for race 5, well, I didn't do the qualifier here just to finish faster, plus since this track was my kryptonite anyway and I had a race to burn, I don't think I lost much by not doing the qualifier here. I still got 4th at least, and then it was off to Suzuka for the apparent finale, at least as far as I was aware. Another sprint around the track, and a really ballin' final lap time with another first place to boot, and I was once again the champion of year number 4. And with that, my joy got even greater when I saw the credits start to roll, which can only mean one thing: game complete. So, overall, how was this experience? Okay, it wasn't as bad as Need for Speed Underground was at least, but I mean, this game didn't offer high expectations like that game did. This was pretty much a GBA launch title and like the first racing game of the system, and I guess in that light it wasn't too bad, but I wouldn't say it was good by any stretch. It only had 6 racetracks, and I really didn't see the point of going through those same 6 tracks as many times as we did for the single-player mode, and these tracks were long too, so yeah, it did feel like it went on a bit longer than it should have. Once you find a good setup for your car, you should be good to cruise your way to the end, and the game does have a very generous save system that you can use to retool your setup if needed, or need a little more practice on certain tracks. My biggest complaint was the weight penalty though. Again, I think I understand from a realistic perspective of why that's a thing in actual racing, but I must stress, this is a video game, and I feel like you should be able to disband a little bit of reality in the interest of a more smooth playing experience, and it's just not a comforting feeling knowing that your stats are being purposefully messed with whenever you're doing well. To me, that feels like a slow sabotage where something is being intentionally done to me after every round, but I'm not being told about it, and then it comes back to bite me in the worst way at the worst time. Given it never ended up being that bad of a punishment, as I usually had one race I could throw away and still come in first overall, but still, there were definitely times where I could have done without that gimmick entirely, just saying. Getting to the scores, I gave Top Gear GT Championship a 2 out of 5. Pretty underwhelming overall, but I wouldn't say it was a truly awful game. For enjoyability, I had this at a 1.5. Dragged on too long for what it was, had a balancing mechanic I didn't really like, and while the game control wasn't bad, it could have been a bit better. Plus, getting hung up on years 2 and 3 did kind of stress me out a little, not knowing what I was doing wrong and feeling just kind of stuck with no progress being made. And for difficulty, I gave it a 3. This score could have probably been a little lower, since once you figure out a good stat distribution and the fact that the qualifiers help you more than you think they would, it's really not too bad or too hard of a game. Plus, again, it has the save system you can exploit if you're really getting hung up on something. However, the weight balancing mechanic does throw a very unwelcome wrench into the system, I think, and I swear, I never really figured out why I struggled so hard with Race 5. That track just always felt like an impossibility to win every single time I raced on it. But yeah, that was my adventure of beating Top Gear GT Championship. We do have another Top Gear game we'll be playing in the future in the form of Top Gear Rally, but as usual, with a 1 out of 900 chance of drawing it, we could be waiting a while for that game, just saying. But we'll see how it is when we do play it. For now, with 30 games down, let's check out the next game we'll be playing for this challenge. Hey, wait a minute, what does this button do? Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.